Good morning, everybody. This is Frank with Iron Age News. It's July 11th, Friday, 8:30 a.m. We're going to have a two for one because it works out that way. We're going to be discussing two things: the now famous arms shipment pause to the Ukraine and who was really behind it. And secondly, most people are wondering why were we shipping weapons to Ukraine, and we'll discuss Trump's continuing role in the Ukraine peace process. So first, we'll talk about the pause. All right. July 2nd, a weapon shipment meant for Ukraine, which contained, among other things, Patriot interceptor missiles, Stingers, 155 millimeter shells, was suddenly put on hold. There was no announcement, no NATO coordination, and no explanation. The NATO coordination thing will come in later as we unraveled what was happening there. Okay. Then on July 8th, the reporters get a hold of Trump on the lawn. Surprisingly, there was a leak, right? He looks stunned. He hadn't been told. His response was very simple. He says, "Why don't you tell me about it?" Meaning to the reporters. He immediately orders the shipments to resume and throws in 10 more Patriot missiles for good measure. The next day, the Pentagon confirms, yes, the pause was real. Yes, the resumption came directly from the president. And here is the thing about this whole deal, and I guess we have to thank the media. The president wasn't supposed to find out this way. Okay. The Pentagon's official excuse is going to be a stockpile readiness review. And that is bureaucratic speak, Pentagon speak for we were running low and had to check inventory. But doesn't pass the smell test because we had been through this under the Biden administration when they said we were draining the stockpile of all of our weapons. And the Pentagon eased everybody's fears and there was no problem, right? All of a sudden there's a problem. This is the first shipment of weapons that's moved out in quite some time, all right? So because under a normal procedure, the allies would be notified. NATO logistics is all strictly out of their operating procedure, not fantasizing this. NATO logistics teams would be looped in. Euro Command would be mobilizing replacements. None of that happened. There would have been hundreds, if not more, let's say 1,000 people involved in the motion of getting this weapon systems over to the Ukrainians. Okay. There's not one memo, not one alert. And there's why. You say, why would this happen? Three key offices, the DSCA, EUCOM, which is European Command, and the European NATO Policy Directive, all fell silent at the same time, which comes up to yourself and you say, how could three autonomous organizations be quiet on the same issue if none of them are aware of what's going on amongst each other? So if that's the case, why was this silence coordinated? And if so, who put it together? Well, of course, it always goes to poor Pete Hegseth on a drunken tear with 30 Thai tranny boys went nuts and caused this to happen, which is not the truth, okay? My guess, and the guess of some of my friends and fellow researchers, is Elbridge Colby, Elbridge, Colby, Colby. He is Trump's Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. He is the architect of the Asia First Doctrine, and in this case, the man whose office routed the memo that paused the shipments. Colby didn't send the halt order himself, so, his little paws are not on it. But his subordinates did. Michael F. Miller, DSCA, held the cables. David Baker, policy leader for NATO, kept Brussels in the dark. General Grinkovich, head of EUCOM, froze movement without content. If even one of them had followed standard notification protocol, the whole thing would have blown wide open. But they didn't. They all stayed quiet on this, and that doesn't happen by accident. So what was the goal? Okay. Critics say this was an administrative insurgency, an attempt to isolate Trump's defense team, continue to undermine Secretary Pete Hegseth, and embarrass the president publicly, which it probably was. And who benefits? There's a number of people, but we'll stick to the ones that we can pretty much finger on this one, which would be Mitch McConnell's people. So do defense contractors who want a slower, more predictable pace of support. Defense contractors don't believe in the defense contractor urgency of World War II. They get to it when they get to it. They don't want to train new people. They don't want to build new facilities. They don't want to innovate. They don't want to do shit. And their laziness in certain situations can be argued to have caused the deaths of hundreds, if not thousands, of U.S. service people since the end of World War II. That's how it is, right? That's why you get mad at these guys with their billions of dollars. And yes, unfortunately, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he's now emerging as the GOP's hawkish voice on foreign policy, carefully echoed McConnell's tone while distancing himself from Trump's America First instincts, which is not odd knowing Rubio's background. But since the time of this, even in a few days, I think Rubio has had a come to Jesus moment. So I'm not going to drag him too much because, what you're used to doing for your old masters for a decade or so or more, it's hard to shake off because, in everybody's mind, what they say to guys like Marco is Trump's gone in 2 to 3 years. You're still going to be here and we'll still be below the surface, holding our breath like good little alligators, right? So this was not, as I said, an issue of a weapon shipment. It was an issue about who's controlling what, Pentagon versus the executive, with a lot of the neocons thrown in on the Pentagon side. Okay, this is not the Democratic Party per se involved in this, was strictly blue on blue violence. Okay, so it's not a mutiny because he would be able to crush a mutiny immediately. Although, as you know from the old days of his last presidency, the Pentagon was dumb enough to have put that letter together with the generals and admirals who declared that Trump was not going to be the legitimate successor, as well as the intelligence agencies who did the same thing. And none of them were ever rounded up and beaten with sticks as they should have been. Okay, because it's called treason. What they did was a treasonous act. Go find your lawyer, I'll go find my lawyer, and you'll owe me $1 million at the end of the day. Okay. This is a more sophisticated move, which makes it more of a McConnell-esque type thing because he's a very sneaky little lizard. The Pentagon is becoming a policy fortress. It is impervious to electoral shifts. It's selectively deaf to the commander-in-chief and insulated by layers of career staff and mid-level employees who believe they know better. And trust me, they will tell you how much more they know than you do. I will tell you that. One the other day, I wanted to slap the fucking shit out of that kid. But they just send the message. He goes, and they did. You may be the president, but we still hold the levers, right? We're going to do what we think is right. This is our clown house, and this is how things are done. So what now? I would say, unless it's Pam Bondi, unless something really goes wrong, expect to see subpoenas, expect to see hearings, expect a fight, which won't be in Ukraine, but inside the five-sided war machine that we call the Pentagon. Trump may be back in office, but his enemies have never left the building. And this is a clear signal as to that being done. They do not want accountability at the Pentagon. They do not want cost efficiency at the Pentagon. They don't want any of that. The Pentagon, originally the Joint Chiefs of Staff, if as I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, was there to ease the interaction between the executive and Congress and the military. Go look at the size of that building and see how many people are employed there and realize that the United States military, like some other countries, Brazil does it a little bit themselves, has run a parallel government where it employs people that are probably unemployable in some jobs. Trust me, there are. So they go out and they pave streets or they paint rocks or they have jobs that keep people busy. And over the years, the people that run the people that do that felt that they were more entitled to more money than they actually deserved. and have made this gigantic reverse pyramid to establish how many 4- and 5-star generals we've had since, I don't know, I'd say it's probably started in the late 70s, early 80s, Star Wars around then. And versus Eisenhower being the highest ranking general in World War II. The difference being, of course, Eisenhower is in charge of a wartime army where results mattered. The guys in charge of the Joint Chiefs are in charge of a giant employment machine and money siphoning scam that benefits maybe ultimately 6 big contractors. There are lots of little ones, but without the big ones, you don't exist either. So that has become a problem, and something that now, as far as I'm concerned, he has a license to go out there and kick the shit out of these guys because of this. You're messing with foreign policy. And here's the reason. Now's our perfect time to tie it into what the policy is and why the weapons were needed. All right. Hopefully this thing boots up. Okay. So everybody was shocked at the fact that Donald Trump was getting involved with sending weapons to the Ukraine. But we have to get down to the important thing here. The mainstream media wants to believe that President Trump has reverse course on Ukraine, that somehow by authorizing these weapons that did not show up, he's gone soft, or he's bending to the pressure of the same foreign policy blob that undermined him during his first term in office. A lot on my mind. So that's bullshit, okay? There's no about face here. What you're witnessing is a classic Trump strategic leverage through calibrated force, is what we would call it. The Trump doctrine has not changed. It's about avoiding endless wars. It's about rejecting globalist entanglements and putting American interests first. But, you know, what else is about? It's not letting your adversaries win the war while you're negotiating the peace. And right now, that's exactly what this move is about. It's not to help Ukraine win. If you looked at the inventory, it's mostly defensive weaponry, except we'll count artillery as offensive. But stopping Russia from winning outright before a peace deal can be cut. Okay, this arms transfer is a two-sided maneuver, which is why its timeliness is important, because things had to hit the beach at a certain time because of what we're talking about. It's aimed at blocking Putin from a strategic breakthrough, particularly a southern push toward Odessa, which would lock down the Black Sea and collapse Ukraine's economy. And on the other hand, it's a warning to Zelensky, which is, don't think the gravy train is coming back. We'll give you enough to survive, but not enough to stall peace. And that's how Trump is trying to create equal pressure on both sides. Stop Russia from feeling victorious, stop Ukraine from feeling invincible. He has a number of problems that also are going on with the Ukraine side, which is the meddling of the French. For whatever reason, they bring nothing to the table. The meddling of the EU and the arms producers and everybody else who's looking at this as a giant gravy train. These are the replacements for the Biden administration, the ones that have no problem laundering money through the new Ukraine bank and such and such and such. Remember that when they tell you about Ukrainian banks, there are two. There is the one that Donald Trump put together, which is completely transparent and only deals with any transaction occurring with the raw materials extraction. And the second is the bank that was put together by BlackRock and JP Morgan Chase, which is completely opaque, which is privately run and privately financed. Both of them are real. You can go on our home site at www.southfloridaconservative.com. We did a report on the Ukrainian bank, the crooked one, as it came out, which is back during the Biden administration, and also on the Trump Ukrainian bank, which is also on there. So that's what we have going on with that. So the idea is to keep this equal pressure and keep them both just desperate enough to come to the table, because nobody is a big winner at this point, okay? The weapons themselves that came out, he gets no F-16s. He gets no long-range missiles. He gets no full-spectrum style NATO integration. what's going over. He's getting drones, he's getting shells, he's getting defensive systems, it's tactical stuff, it's time limited, and it's just enough to hold the line. He has to make sure that the Ukrainians survive into the midterm elections. If it has to go that long, they have to survive past the midterm elections in the United States, because losing Ukraine may, because there's some foolish people out there, may cut into your chance of being elected into Congress or Senate or what have you, right? Dog catcher. So that's why the deal is what it is. Now, what the Trump administration is really doing is it wants to, like I said, preserve Ukraine's viability just enough. He needs to deny Putin a victory, because Putin does the same thing. He doesn't need him escalating, because Putin is, if you were dealing with a Sun Tzu style tactical situation, he's on death ground, but he put himself into that position. The Ukrainian government under Zelensky is also in that same type of situation, but once again, outside forces have moved them towards that. Death ground, if you can look it up yourself, means that you really have got to just stay and stay the course at the moment, because there's no retreating, right? Although, because if Russia retreats, will Putin be assassinated? Could be. If Russia wins, which is the same as Ukraine retreating, Zelensky gets assassinated, put in jail or something. So the guys running the show have no real carrot and a bunch of sticks, okay? So we also have to do, other than the issues with Putin and Zelensky, is that we have to keep Europe on the hook. But we have to remind them that we are not paying for the war anymore. If they want to go play army, they're going to have to pay for it. All right. We have a lot of logistical stuff still in there, which makes up for us putting any more things in the field. But if you look at the European weapons producers, especially the German companies, they are all in full expansion mode and trying to go further. They were at one point hindered by their constitution, which we wrote. General Marshall, I believe, wrote it, and that they weren't allowed to do certain things. Well, they found ways to get around that now. And honestly, that constitution of theirs should have been challenged just the same way the Japanese constitution was challenged, due to the fact that they were forced to write the document that ruled their country under the shadow of American rifles. That's why that's why Germany got stuck bringing so many foreigners in from the beginning. General Marshall was going to breed them out. If he couldn't beat the Nazi out of them, he was going to breed it out of them. That was part of the problem with them having this wide open immigration policy. Also limited the size of their army. They're a self-defense force. Japan is also a self-defense force. They need to have them challenge that on their own, because if we bring it up, then it gives them the shame that we taught, that we conquered them and blah, blah, blah. So, and honestly, the Russians would have to be with us on the German thing, because we only wrote the West German paperwork. But that's getting into the weeds there. All right. So, like I said, this is not an emotional, it's not ideological. This is statecraft that Trump is operating in, and it's designed to bring both Zelensky and Putin to the table on Trump's terms. And when they get there, Trump wants a deal, and this is pretty much where he wants to go. It's not guesswork. Ukraine has to give up the NATO ambitions. Russia has to freeze its border lines, and America gets to walk away, having prevented the collapse without prolonging the war. All right, that's where we want. Now, the land swapping and stuff like that is going to have to be dealt with. There's no way Russia's walking out of there with no, without the property that it sees. They really are more interested in the Crimea and keeping that first and foremost. But then again, the Ukrainians have never beaten them down there. So it's not like that's even on the table. So if you take one thing away from the show, I'm sorry it's been long. It's a little low energy, but there's a lot to go through. And things have changed, obviously, even again, since we started writing this up. The Trump weapons shipment is not a step toward war, it is a step toward leverage. The Biden administration shipped billions and bought nothing but corruption and stalemate, which is what it wanted to do. Trump, he's spending a fraction of that to set the stage for peace. So that's not a reversal. That's basically the leadership model that he's been following since the beginning. So that's all we have for now. Who knows what's going to occur over there in the next day or two? I believe when people tell me the problem with Ukrainian policy is it depends on the quality of the cocaine that the president gets a hold of, and it very well could be. I don't think. I think Putin's a teetotaler and just has a lot of ugly ex-girlfriends, from what I've seen. But what do I know, right? So that's about all. Have a good day. Once again, Friday, July 11th. Enjoy your weekend.